Shall we start the session by chanting Namo Tassa? Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. So for today's class, with the Lakkhana Sutta, before we finish off with the Lakkhana Sutta, we want to sort of go into the commentary and to see what the commentary has to say about the Lakkhana Sutta. Why specifically we are going into the commentary with regards to the Lakkhana Sutta and we did not do the same with the other suttas that we did, is because the Lakkhana Sutta is directly about the Buddha and the Buddha's appearance and what the Buddha's practice was about. So let us see. I feel that it has a number of interesting points for our practice, and also to know about the perceival or how the scholarly world perceives the Lakkhana Sutta in different perspectives, which are quite interesting. And it is also interesting to note that when we read the suttas from the viewpoint of practitioners, or from the viewpoint of traditional Buddhists, or from the viewpoint of people who have been cultured or brought up in a specific culture of Buddhism, the way that we would look at the sutras are a bit different from the way that the scholars would look at the sutras from. So it has a it has a it has a balance of of it has a balance of um, it has a balance of the practice as well as then what the scholars think. But I feel like there is always in the Buddhist world, when it comes to the study and learning of Buddhism, there has always been this clash between scholars and practitioners, and this clash, up until today, it still exists, right? Up until today, it still exists. And I believe, being a person who has both studied Buddhism in a university environment as well as a Pariyapti or a traditional Buddhist scriptural study environment, I believe that in this study of Buddhism, the manner in which this university study or the scholastic university study is conducted is a little bit different to the way that the Pariyapti education is conducted. The university education, it takes a stance of a more philosophy-like study, whereas in the Buddhist Pariyapti or the traditional study, we do not study it from the stance of philosophy, right? And this is quite important to note, because in philosophy, we look at one thing with different angles or different views, which is good, but also noting that there might not be a clear end to it. But whereas in the Pariyapti or the traditional study of Buddhism, we find that there can exist different viewpoints to the subject, right? But there is also an end point to that same subject. Example, if you would take sutras or texts such as, let's say, the Satipatthana Sutta, the Discourse on the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, we know it can be looked at in different ways. It can be looked at in different ways. It can be looked at as by the way of the practitioner. It can be looked act as a comparative study, to conduct a comparative study between the practices of Vipassana and the other practices, between Hinduism, Brahmanism, the Vedas. It can be looked at in different ways. But we must remind ourselves that the sutta itself was taught for the attainment of Nibbana. The reason behind that is why there is this word, some of you might have heard, Nidana Katha. Katha means the story. Nidana is the background. So Nidana Katha, for example, of the Metta Sutta is, or the Sutra or the Discourse on Loving Kindness, is for the development or the supporting of the monks to be able to cultivate this radiance of loving kindness, which gave them the mental strength to survive in forests that were not so pure, meaning that were infested by inhuman demonic possessions. Right, that was the reason. Now, then the Metta Sutta's end goal was actually then to create this strength of mind. This perspective, or recognizing this perspective or approach to the Dhamma, is very important, or else we find ourselves completely negating certain facts. Now, this is not necessary. It is not necessary to completely negate certain facts. Now, for example, even with the study of the Abhidhamma, we know that there are a lot of sort of stories which would say, okay, there's a group of people who would say, there is proof that the Abhidhamma is not the teaching of the Buddha. Then there is a group of people who would say that the Abhidhamma, or to those people who do not know what the Abhidhamma is, it is the third or another basket of Buddhism, a different canonical text in itself. And in the Abhidhamma, we have then people who would say, no, it was within the suttas and later on it was taken out. And we have the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which was created into a whole new canon itself, right? So in that same way, but the thing is, who knows really? Who knows? Because at the end of the day, we are still debating this because we do not have sufficient proof within the text to then say, okay, Abhidhamma was or was not the teaching of the Buddha. We do not. But the Buddha left us with a message. In the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha's, designated as the Buddha's last sutta, the Buddha teaches us how we should approach questions such as this. Is this, the Buddha says, after my demise, there is going to be Dhamma and Adhamma. Adhamma is the teachings which are not those of the Buddha, right? So there are going to be teachings that are going to be taught as said by the Buddha that are not by the Buddha. Then what is the way that the Buddha says, see whether it creates or gives way or allows for the getting rid of the hindrances, or is it something which is apart from that? Now, with social media, with WhatsApp, Facebook, we see a lot of memes and sort of quotations, all in, I suppose, all in sort of all with good intentions, but sometimes the wordings are quite off, or sometimes the wordings are sort of done in a way to suit the younger generations, which can be quite distorting to us, who then look at it and then imagine, oh my gosh, the Buddha did not say this, or especially the Buddha did not say this in this sort of a way. Right? Now, that is where, again, we must know how to, that is why within this sutta, we want to sort of go into the Lakkhana, with the Lakkhana Sutta, and also Squarespace, the website is going through, I think, some sort of maintenance, and I cannot put up a new sutta. So that also be the reason. That also be the reason, so we have to continue with this sutta for today as well. So, right. So page number 146, please. We are not going to be reading through the entirety of the beginning, but we are going to go through patches of it. So 100, so this is going to be, it's the first page of the Lakkhana Sutta, Lakkhana Sutta that I have put up on the website. Are we ready? Yeah, okay. The human Buddha. The Buddha looks like most other monks. Let us first look at the early Buddhist texts for evidence on what the Buddha really looks like. The Vinaya and the Sutras give us a clear impression that the Buddha looks very much like most other bona fide monks. Just as Buddha has introduced the Vinaya and its rules, he keeps them too. As I say, so do I, as I do, so I say. In other words, the Buddha keeps his head shaven, wears rag robes, and has nothing to do with pleasure and wealth, just like any other good monk. Well, that is a bit questionable, to be honest. That is a bit questionable. First of all, the Buddha physically did not look like most of the other monks. In the Tipitaka, we know there are three classifications of the bodies that were bodies in the sense of the physical appearance. The first was in Pali, it was Pakati, Pakati Purisa, right? Actually, the proper pronoun is Pakati, Pakati Purisa. Majjhima Purisa and Maha Purisa. Now, I put it on the chat for those of you who want to make a note of it if you like to. Now, these were the classifications according to the Tipitaka. Now, this is mentioned within the Vinaya, right? Because this is of great importance in the Vinaya when it comes to measurements, right? Now, a Pakata Purusa is known to be the size that we are, right? Is the size that we are, right? Now, people like Vishaka, Anathapindika, to those of you who do not know, who were the chief disciple, lay disciples of the Buddha, and most of them, the other monks, were Majjhima Purisas, right? Were Majjhima Purisas. And then we have people like Sariputta, the Buddha, who were Mahapurisas, right? Now, I remember at university when we were doing this specific chapter, we had to we were surprised because now, as you do know, in the Aranyas, we have to stitch our own robes, right? We had to stitch our own robes. So now, because we were interested and we were also reading the Vinaya at the time, the measurements between the measurements between the measurements between the measurements between our robes and the size of the robe which is mentioned as the Buddha's robes is greatly different, right? Now, for example, even if I am to take this hall that I am in right now, the Buddha's robe would be big as this hall. It was a big robe, right? So the size of the Buddha was quite large. The Buddha had a quite, now this is not to say that he was obese. This is to say that the Buddha was a large, broad, tall man, right? So the Buddha was not really a person who looked like us, right? Who looked like us. Keeps his head shaven. The Buddha did not shave his head, right? The Buddha did not clean shave his head. The Buddha only maybe what would be the right thing to say? Is it to say trim, or the Buddha had hair, a good 6 inches of hair on his head, a good 6 inches. So as monks, actually, we are also allowed to grow hair up to 6 inches, right? Hair up to 6 inches. That is allowable in the Vinaya. Bears rag robes. The Buddha did not wear rag robes really. The Buddha was offered the most finest of robes, and it is said that, of course, there were a lot of monks who wore rag robes, but the Buddha, being the Buddha and having the position that he had, the Buddha, of course, he had robes which are of good quality. But remember that these robes were also, it is like, for example, like the dasadaha, the khada, I don't know the English word, but we have these sort of robes with the small sort of stitched boxes, you would say. We would call it the with for example, we have robes with 1,000 sections, 10,000 sections, right? Now, in Aranyas, also certain Aranyas, I have seen to this day, there are certain monks, who would, yes, switch patchwork. You wouldn't call it patchwork per se, but it is, yes, it is some sort of patchwork, really. And you would have monks who would have this lot of patchwork, and these robes would be really, really heavy, right? Because of all the patchwork that goes into them, right? But of course, the Buddha being the Buddha, right, of course, received a lot of offerings of different cloths and cottons and all of these things, right? Furthermore, there's clear evidence that on many occasions, not everyone is able at once to recognize the Buddha upon seeing him, as recounted in these discourses, the Samanyapala discourse, the Upaklesha Sutta, and the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. In the Samanyapala Sutta, records that Ajatasattu has to ask the physician Jivaka which of the monks in the assembly is the Buddha. The Upaklesha Sutta says that the park keeper at the Eastern Bamboo Deer Park does not recognize the Buddha and stops him. Right? The Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta records how in the newly renounced monk Pukusati recognizes the Buddha only after listening to him, his teaching. Right? And there were certain other occasions where Venerable Mahakassapa, actually. Venerable Mahakassapa was mistaken for the Buddha, right? And this is one of the reasons that Venerable Mahakassapa leaves the retinue of monks and then sort of goes on to live in a faraway place from where the Buddha is, because he once received an offering which was meant to be offered to the Buddha. Venerable Mahakassapa received it, right? And out of sort of respect for the Buddha, Venerable Mahakassapa thought to himself, I am not a person who is worthy to be sort of seen as or in equal with the Buddha, and I must go away. And he did, and only returned in certain occasions. He did not return often. Also, there is a nice sort of occasion where the first 5 bhikkhus, remember who the first 5 bhikkhus were? Yes. The first 5 bhikkhus. Yes. Ankondanya. Ankondanya.
Kondanya Badya Bappa Mahanama Asaji.
All right. Thank you. So there was an occasion where these 5 monks did not live with the Buddha, right? They were monks. Now that is also the beauty that we must realize. These monks, even I have spoken of the monk who was protecting or practicing the Moneyya Pratipada, which is the most austeric practice within the Sasana. What is the Moneyya Pratipada? Can anyone tell me what the Moneyya Pratipada is? Moneyya?
That you don't talk with anyone. Is that you?
But the Dhutanga monks practice 1 meal a day.
So you more specific? What is the Moneyya Pratipada? Devika, no Devika.
Yes, I said that. Yes.
No? What is the Moneyya Pratipada?
Katha karanne nathi pratipada.
Katha karanne nathi pratipada?
In silence. You keep.
So they have 1 meal a day, and the Dhutanga, like the Dhutanga monks.
Yeah, like the Dhutanga, but you have to. It's a very specific practice. So okay. So yes, Pushpa.
the monk doesn't sit, I think.
Okay, no.
No?
So
No,
the
that's
Maya
not it.
Pratipada is the practice of all austeric practices, right? So many monks would practice maybe 4, 3, you know, practices. But in the Monaya Pratipada, what happens is this one monk practices all the austeric practices, right? Which would entail from eating one meal a day to eating a meal in one seat to eating all the food in one bowl. So that would mean the dessert, the fruit, anything that is given to the bowl has to be mixed up. That not sleeping under one tree or one forest, actually one forest per one tree per night, not sleeping, not lying or resting one's back on the ground or on a bed to sleep, right? So all of these things, now just imagine, not key, so you had to sleep in a meditating posture, right? And not resting your back. Now this is practices such as this, they are very difficult to carry on, right? They're very difficult to carry on. I remember when we were in the RNA, some of friends, we would be doing this together, and we remember like that week also we would be very, very grumpy. Really on edge, because obviously you had not slept properly for 2 or 3 days, so obviously you're going to be quite grumpy. So just imagine doing this for many, many years. Now the Monaya Pratipada is a very, very difficult Pratipada or a practice, and it is often only practiced by one monk properly in the whole of the sort of the extent of the sasana, right, or the sangha, right? So moving on. Moreover, the Buddha, so I forgot to tell you the story actually of there was an event now when Ananda, Sariputta, Moggallana, and all these bhikkhus, they were together on a Uposatha day, right? And in a large hall, right? They were, of course, they were the leading bhikkhus, and the 60 other sort of the leading bhikkhus right at the front, given titles by the Buddha as the foremost bhikkhus of the sasana. And then the Vinaya explains a situation where at one point the doors open and there are these 5 bhikkhus, not recognized by many but few, who comes walking up, right? And at that point, the young monks are in awe because Sariputta, Moggallana, all these more senior bhikkhus sitting right in the front, right next to the Buddha, gets up, right? Gets up and goes behind, and the young monks are all in awe, right? To see, and no one recognizes who these monks are because they were not together with the Buddha. That sort of designates the relationship that they have with the Dhamma. How you can have a strong connection, but that strong connection does not mean that you have to be there as a shadow, or that you don't have to sort of hold on, right? And then they worship the Buddha and the monks, the senior monks, now they were the most senior monks, the first monks to be ordained right after the Buddha, right after the Bodhisattva attained Buddhahood, right? And then what happened? These monks, the most senior monks, thought, they worshipped, they spoke with the Buddha, and they thought to themselves, we must not disturb the method that is being carried out here, right? We have now come for what we have come for. We have now done what we have come for, and now we must leave. And they left. The fact, although the Buddha, of course, has maintained and has knowledge, made us aware about procedures and the seniority and all of that, but remember that these things are always there to protect values. But there is something more than that as well, right? Being considerate, right? being considerate, being aware, all of these things become part of the Dhamma, and he's a part of the Dhamma practitioner, right? And he's a part of the Dhamma practitioner, right? So moving on. Now, moreover, the Buddha often speaks about the Buddha. Can someone read, please? Hey, Mali, you're on a phone, yeah? Damsiri, do you want to read? Would you like to read? Will you have read now a couple of times, so we'll give it to other person.
Bhante, when we talk of the Dutanga monks, Bhante, is that Mahakassapa, the foremost?
No. Monaya Pratipada was carried out, not by Mahakassapa. Bhante also did not carry out all the Monayas.
Okay.
Let me remind myself, I will let you know who carried out. I forget his name.
And who were the 5 monks who came where everybody got up? Who were they? The first 5 monks.
Okay. All right. Damsiri, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Moreover, the Buddha often speaks unequivocally on the supremacy of Dharma, which even he himself hold above himself, such as in the teaching of Garva Sutta. The early arahats, such as the elder Lakkhana Bhaddiya, exhort us not to be misled by external appearances, but Lakkuntaka,
yes,
Bhaddiya, but to give priority in the Dhamma, Buddha's spirituality and the marks. At least 3 suttas attest to the significance of the spiritual rather than physical character of great man, Mahapurusha. The great man concept is here not a prophetic or hagiographic ideology of twofold destiny, that of worldly perfection or spiritual excellence and awakening, but only the latter. Okay.
We'll stop there.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
that is to say, remember, this is not a sort of, this sutta was not a sort of a bragging of the Buddha's beauty. Rather, the sutta was a mentioning or a pathway for everyone in terms of how one should lead one's life in a spiritual aspect, and those benefits that becomes of a person or the person receives through living that pattern of goodness, right? That is the aim of this sutta, right? Now, Damsiri, please continue from in the Mahapurusha Sutta.
In the Mahapurusha Sutta, Buddha gives a meditative definition of the great man to the Sariputta. That is, he is one of the dwells with the mind liberated through the practice of 4 Satipatthana. The most important canonical discussion on the great man is found in the Anuruddha Maha Vitakka Sutta.
All right.
Where,
thank you, Damsiri.
Yeah.
Now, it is very important to know this word, the mind liberated through the practice of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. This gives us a notion that when the Mahasatipatthana or the 4 foundations of mindfulness is practiced, the 4 techniques of vipassana, it should awaken our minds to let go of the attachment that we have to both the mind and materiality elements of our existence, which awakens a sense of, or which awakens us with a sense of freedom and bondage to mind and matter. Right? Remember that this path, this word liberated, it is very important to know that this attachment that we have, even to Buddhism, even to culture, even to traditions. Now, all of that we must know. It is not to say we throw everything out the window and we behave in very odd ways. No, that is not what is said. We must know in our mind, right? I mean, I am using this water bottle. I know that one day I will have to throw this away, or one day I will have to buy a new one. But up until that day arrives, I use the water bottle. That's it, right? If something breaks, similarly, okay, it has broken now. There is no reason for me to fight or scream and shout and howl. It is broken. What can we do next? In that kind of a manner, we know, we use things, we have mannerisms and behaviors, but we know what they are. We do not get carried away out of context and build our bondage to samsara, or the cycle of rebirth and death, through different stories, right? Through different stories. Please continue.
The Anuruddha Maha, sorry. Got.
Yeah, that is, yeah, please continue.
No, I lost the, okay. Bhante, 1 minute. Something happened. Okay.
Yeah.
I had to go back. Just give me resources.
Okay, you get there, Damsiri, I will read. The most important canonical discussion on the great man is found in the Anuruddha Mahavitakka Sutta, wherein the Buddha teaches how proper mental reflection can bring about inner stillness, leading to spiritual liberation. A very important point to note, and beautifully written as well. Interestingly, this teaching has nothing to do with the conception of a great man as depicted in the Lakkhana Sutta. Have you got it, Damsiri?
Yeah.
All right, please continue.
In other words, the Buddha has always emphasized on the spirituality of the great man. Historically, Buddha has none of these Superman marks, but his authenticity and the spirituality are in no way diminished or affected. There are at best mythical marks of the fruits of his past good karma, as detailed in the Lakkhana Sutta. We will now examine how and why these marks arose.
The historians and people who have been in the study of historical ancient religions have always seen the way that we sometimes do create imagery in the interpretations of events and mystical events which have some sort of spiritual background and story, right? That has always been so. Even if we are to sort of look at the zodiac signs, right? We know what the zodiac signs are, of course we do, right? Which then we look at the stars, we would think, now, if you would type in the zodiac signs and you look at the astrological sort of the positioning of the stars itself, right? A picture, it looks nothing as what the zodiac sign represents, right? In the zodiac sign, you would, for example, Sagittarius would be like a man on a horse or something like that. And then you look at the stars or the depiction of stars, and they're like, okay, how did they think that this was a man on a horse? Because you know what I mean. So in that way, we see that imagery has always been used. In Hinduism, it has been used greatly, they believe, right? They believe. And here we find, now I am not of the perception that it is exactly what the Lakkhana Sutta is, but I am bringing in this aspect of, I feel that, who is his author?
Piyatan.
I feel that Piyatan is taking that sort of a route to sort of shed light on this. Damsir, please continue.
Lakkhana Sutta and related texts.
Okay, we're not going to read that. Hold on. So Lakkhana Sutta, in the Lakkhana Sutta, we don't have a lot of evidence. It is actually in the Mahapadana Sutta that we have a lot of evidence regarding whatever it is regarding the characteristics of the Buddha, the physical attributes and characteristics of the Buddha. So the Lakkhana Sutta, the Mahapadana Sutta, is somewhat like a commentary to the Lakkhana Sutta. So then we had the Brahmaya Sutta and the Mahavastu Sutta, but the Mahapadana Sutta remains to be sort of like the main sutta, go-to sutta with regards to the Mahapurusha Lakkhanas, the characteristics, right? Damsiri, I want you to continue from
all these.
Sorry, next
Yes.
page.
Oh, next page.
Next page, 148, 212, please.
212. Earliest allusions. Next, we have text that allude to the 32 marks without listing them, and also without mentioning the twin destinies of the great man. These texts are listed here with the experts regarding them or who attribute them to the Buddha. Ambatta Sutta, Sonyanda Sutta, Brahmayu Sutta, Tikkhana Sutta, Nalaka Sutta, Paryana Sutta, Vagga, Milinda Panya. Mahapadana Sutta says that it is the Brahmins skilled in sign who examine the body of Prince Vipassi, a past Buddha, and determine that he has 32 marks of the great man.
All right, Damsiri, hold on. Now,
Yeah.
now as I just mentioned about the imagery, right? And now we have the signs, right? Now we have the signs which have been interpreted by the sort of the Brahmins who are of that age. Remember, even with Gautama Buddha or our Buddha, it was the same, wasn't it? When he was a child, it was the same. And now we have a sort of a representation or a parallel between that and this, right? Between that and this. So this is not to say, now for example, in the study of the body, now we would say we could look at a way a person walks, right? And by the way the person walks, we can tell certain things about that person's characteristics and personality. We have the study of handwriting. The way a person writes, we could sort of say what kind of characteristics and personality that person has. In ways like that. Now, in ways such as that, the Brahmins also had this way of sort of saying, it is not to say that exact. Now, for example, when we would say spokes, 1,000 spokes on the Buddha's feet. It is not to say that the Buddha really had 1,000 spokes like looks on the feet, but to the Brahmins, that visualization of the way that they interpreted the way that the feet were of such a nature, right? Now a person who looked at my feet personally, he said that I have rather flat feet, but it was not to say that it was from like the illness of flat foot, but he was saying as an astrologist or someone like that, he was assuming, or he was saying of the, so it is to say that there is some sort of parallel, not that it is exactly of that image. So Damsiri, please continue.
Another famous account from the commentaries is found in the Jataka Nidhana. 8 of the 108 Brahmins invited by the Raja Suddhodana to foresee the Bodhisattva's future are Vedic sages and sign readers. 7 of these augurs raises 2 fingers, prognosticating that child Siddhartha would either become a universal monarch if he lives household life, or a universal teacher. If he renounces the world kondanna. The youngest them, however, kondanya, youngest them, however, raises only one finger and declares that Bodhisattva would surely renounce the world to become a world teacher.
Yeah. Remember, Kondanya's son became ordained under the Buddha. Right?
Oh.
Kondanya's son became ordained under the Buddha. So Kondanya, he passed away. And there is an account of his passing away, and his son becomes a prominent disciple of the Buddha. So Kondanya was one of the chief ascetics, not ascetics, one of the chief Brahmins who were present at the sort of the birth of the Buddha at the time. Right?
Son's name was not Kondanya. No.
I forget.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
I feel like the son's name was Kondanya as well, but this is not that Kondanya.
Yeah, okay, yeah. A number of suttas records certain Brahmin as doubting whether the Buddha is endowed with all the 32 marks. Best known of such accounts are found in the Brahmayu Sutta, the Ambatta Sutta, and the Sela Sutta.
Yes. Now, Damsiri,
Yeah.
from there, I want you to go to 213, please. Next page.
213. Wheel turner ideology. The purpose of the wheel turner ideology is clearly an attempt by the Indian Buddhist Sangha to establish itself favorably in Asoka's empire by recognizing and attributing to Asoka the statue of wheel turner or the universal monarch, Chakravarti or Chakravarti in Sanskrit, and in doing so to establish the Buddha as the universal teacher of the empire. This is indeed the most powerful statement that the Sangha has made in entrenching itself in the world. That is, it marks the latest and the final stage, the realization of the ideologies of the wheel turner and his 32 marks.
Please continue.
Okay, such an ideology, one that effectively promotes Buddhism by way of patronage of powerful, such as the emperor, is clearly an attractive one. When Buddhism spread beyond India, it brought with the ideology of wheel turner, so that it became the attractive to the conquerors and the rulers who wished to entrench themselves in the country. Understandably, texts promote such an ideology were translated into local languages and incorporated into local Buddhist works.
Now,
or even
yes, this is to say,
yeah,
excuse me, Damsiri, this is to
yeah.
say, now at a point in the world when the Buddha was living, and even to a stage even after the Buddha's demise, the world was rather raptured by the existence of the Buddha, and also by the concept of an all-controlling master of the world. Hence, this is what it is speaking about, a Chakravarti. Now, this is seen in how sort of in China, how the Chinese became Buddhists, how the emperors sort of took up Buddhism, right? And this was to say the fact now remember, what do the Chakravartis represent? The Chakravartis represent good governance. The Chakravartis represent accountability. The Chakravartis represent Dhammic governance and practice, right? Equality. All of these things are what the Chakravarti represents. And it was very attractive at the time, because at the time it was a different world altogether. right? It was a different world altogether. And remember, it was a world where the ruling class were not affected by the merchants. Now today, the merchants are the rulers, right? The wealthy are the rulers of today's time that we live in. The economy, the capitalism. Capitalism itself shows us that the person who has wealth and influence can do and control and all of that, right? At the time, it was not so. It was a time where the ruling class was brought up to rule and take care of its subjects. Now, there was a research done by a PhD student in Oxford who happened to be a Sri Lankan, UK-born Sri Lankan gentleman who I had the pleasure of meeting in Burma because he presented his presentation in Burma, whose research was the outreach and influence of Buddhism in the world outside of India. So in his research, he had found coins all the way in the Middle East, in ancient Egypt, where they had coins with depictions of the Buddha on their coins. This is not to say that the Egyptians were Buddhists. This is not to say that. This is to say that the Buddha, because of the merchant trade, the word of the Buddha had spread far and wide. The Buddha was a hot topic, somewhat like mindfulness in today's age.
Yeah.
Right? It was a hot topic. Being a part of the Buddha's clan, being a devotee of the Buddha, all of these things were very, very attractive things at the age. So much so that the Egyptians had images of the Buddha on their coins. Right, and he had the research and the images and all of that to sort of prove this as well, and it was quite an interesting thing to see, right?
Yep.
Quite an interesting thing to see. So that is what is sort of being emphasized here. We must understand that in the interpretation of all of these things, when it comes to the interpretation, we must understand that these are interpretations. And at the end of the day, with time, this is what we have to do with the time that we live in. We have to be able to understand it and take it on in a practical means to ourselves, right? In a practical means to ourselves. This is very important. Please, Damsri, go on.
Bhante, can I add something interesting? The famous Pythagoras. Pythagoras was actually in Greek when Buddha was in India. And there's some evidence to prove that he has visited Buddha and met, because as another philosopher, he met Buddha, and there's a theory now says that Pythagoras became a vegetarian, and he spread the vegetarianism in Greek in the first time, all against the meat-eating the people in that country.
Wow.
So it is very...
That is quite interesting, but it's also interesting to note that the Buddha wasn't vegetarian. But the Buddha wasn't vegetarian. This is clear in sutras such as the Amaganda Sutta, and there are 30-odd suttas which says that. But I would also like to, because you brought that topic up, I think it is now time that we actually have to, it is, if we do become vegetarian, it is not because of our religious practices that we must become vegetarian. It is actually because of the environment that we must become vegetarian. Right, and I would encourage all of you to watch Sir Attenborough's new docu-series, actually documentary on Netflix, which speaks about how we could contribute and help to heal the world. And one part of that is consuming less meat. Right, consuming less meat so that we have more space on earth to grow trees and to grow vegetation which can heal the world that we live in. Just putting it out there. Let us continue.
I forgot that. This is indeed the most powerful statement that the Sangha has made in entrenching itself in the world. That is, it marks the latest and final stage realization of the ideologies of the wheel turner and his 32 marks. Such an ideology, one that effectively promotes Buddhism by way of patronage of the powerful, such as emperor, is clearly an attractive one. When Buddhism spreads beyond the India, it thought with it the ideology of wheel turner, so that it became attractive, and conquerors were rulers who wished to entrench themselves in the country. Understandably, the text promotes such an ideology were translated into the local language and incorporate in local Buddhist works, or even new texts were specifically written to promote the ruler. In fact, the ideology of great man and his 32 marks was most developed by Mahayana theologians, who also introduced 80 minor marks. Okay.
Yes.
Sutta summary and the highlights.
All right. We are going to stop there. Now we go on to page number 154, please. Right. Page number 154.
Okay. Right. From the beginning?
Page 154, you find a compilation of all the marks and the past karmic conditions which attributed to the Buddha having the mark that he did. Right now, this is a good chart. Actually, this is a good chart for you to sort of maybe take a picture of or whatnot and sort of have for your reference, because this outlines a Dhammic person's life. Right? Even if you forget all the rest of Buddhism and just focus on doing these things, you will become a magnificent person that the Buddha would also praise. Right? Even just doing these things, which is actually, if we really go into it, which is actually being a human with proper etiquette and manners, who respects his friends and relatives and take care of his friends and relatives. This is what these things are. The 32 marks are of a person who lives life with compassion for oneself and for people around. In actuality, that is what this whole practice of being a Buddhist is all about. Have compassion, respect towards yourself, compassion and respect towards people all around you. Forget all else. Forget the Paticcasamuppada. Forget everything else. And if you just do this even, right, you will become a magnificent person according to the Dhamma that the Buddha claims that the Buddha plus all the deities would praise this person for. Right? This person for. Do you just want to go through that chart just as a way of recapping? Yes. Okay. I will go through that, Dhamsiri.
Yep.
Right. The third, feet with a level tread. Great effort in wholesome deeds, meaning decides to do something good, doesn't turn back before doing it. Got it? The motivation, right? Each sole of his feet have 1,000-spoked wheels, all rimmed and hub, perfect in every way, brought happiness to the masses, did things that brought happiness to people around him. Right? Projecting heals, even giving up killing of living beings, giving up the killing of living beings, animals, all of these things included, right? Long fingers, giving up killing living beings again, soft, tender hands and feet, practice 4 bases of conciliation, bringing people together, right? Strengthening relationships, strengthening friendships, strengthening the views that other people have over other people, right? That net like hands and feet, again, practice of bringing people together, strengthening relationships, strengthening the views that people have of other people, high raised ankles, speaking Dhamma related words, meaning this is not to say, this is very important to those of you who are just new here. This is very important. This is not sort of saying, speak Dhamma all the time. No, you have to. This is to say that a person is able to give a Dhammic or sort of have compassion based approaches to conversation and is able to attribute conversations to impermanent suffering and non-self, right? Impermanent suffering and non-self. Now, for example, if you are speaking of another person to help another person, right, that is something which is good. But if you're speaking of another person with no intentions of helping that person, then it is something which is not Dhammic, right? This is again, isn't that manners? Isn't that proper etiquette? Right? Now, if we are in if we are in a distinguished environment, at a party or a gathering or wherever, we are not supposed to bring or talk of events that spoil the mood, right? Now, isn't this also something like that? Spoil the mood means you are not supposed to talk down people, right? Exactly, this is what it is. You are only supposed to, or you are to speak well of people, or to be able to speak to help a person, not for anything else. But sometimes as a monk, of course, being an agony aunt to hundreds of people, I have realized that people often tend to use compassion as a tool and a gateway to just speak and gossip. This I am only, people tend to, that is misuse in the Dhamma, right? That is misuse in the Dhamma, right? We have to really be clear on what our intentions are, and this is very clear. And remind yourselves that when, you might think that you're fooling someone, you're not fooling really anyone, right? It is as transparent as it gets. Everyone knows how it is, right? Because people are not foolish, people understand, and people are also sensitive. Most people, I believe, who are in Buddhism and who have engaged with people are sensitive to vibrations. They know, right? Then we come to legs are like an antelope's, good, full, wholesome, right? And that is because a careful teacher in every way, uplifting, giving the teachings to people to uplift people, to strengthen people, to give people confidence, right? To give people confidence. 9, without stooping, able to touch and rub both knees with both hands at once. Why? Concerned over the master's welfare, right? Doing things with concern over the master's welfare, right? Now, things like, for example, through COVID, something that we did is we collected donations to help the homeless people. Now, things like that, we do things as a community to help the community, or we gather the community together to help the community. Now, things like that, right? Things like that. This is what gives you the retinue, right? This is what gives you people backing you and supporting you. This is what people who are sitting in affluent places of power have done in their past, according to Buddhism. They have been able to organize good things that have helped people through the kindness and compassion and brought out the kindness and compassion of other people. That is why even sometimes they're talking utter nonsense, but you find these people following like blind sort of, masses. Why? That sort of merit that you have, right? That is an energy. The seat male organ. Now, this is to say that the male organ of the Buddha has a sort of a seat-like cover, like that of a cow's, it seems, right? And that is because of reuniting lost relatives and friends, bringing together families, broken up families, bringing together. The other is a golden complexion. A golden complexion is because shows no anger, always calm, right? Shows no anger, always calm. Actually, the always calm is a little bit, it is specifically shows no anger, right? Does not sort of show or enact out of anger. That is the reason for such a effect of skin color. Then a skin so delicate and smooth that neither dust nor dirt can settle on it. Why is that? Recluses has settled. Why is that? Always calm, recluses and Brahmins consulted him. Recluses and Brahmins consulted him. No, that is because of paying respects to those who are worthy and deserving of respect, such as recluses and Brahmins, right? Showing respect to those who deserve to be shown respect to. This, when they say recluses and Brahmins, this would entail elders and people who are our parents, people who are worthy of respect, includes our friends. Now, even when we have relationships, when we are so friendly, we forget the reasons as to why we respect these people. Now, that is wrong. We must always have respect in our relationships, right? Even in a love affair or a love relationship or a partnership, we know that it is not love that keeps people together, it is respect that keeps people together. I think said this so many times. It is not love, it's respect that keeps people together, and it is because of that respect that we tend to love people more for, right? Then we move on, right? Single body hair to a poor, right? And that is because of giving up false speech. Then we have upward growing body hairs, colored, curly to the right, perfectly straight. And that is because of speaking Dhamma related words, right? The body hairs, and of course the curling to the right, the Uraloma Dhatu we call it, right? And that is because of speaking Dhamma related words. Dhamma related words are supposed to, remember, I mentioned a couple of examples last time. If the Dhamma is going to hurt a person, don't say it, right? If the impact that you're creating is going to hurt people, just be quiet, right? That is not what the intention of Dhamma should be, right? The intention of Dhamma should be to enlighten. Enlighten means from whatever situation, whatever place they are, at the end of your words, they should be in a better place, right? Not to say that you have to achieve 100%, even a tad tiny bit. That should be remembered, everyone, right? So so a person doesn't sort of protect the 5 precepts and you do, and you going and gloating about your Dhamma practice is not what the Dhamma talked about, right? I mean, it is very funny when we think about it, but we also know how common it is, right? We all know how common such practices are in the spiritual world. Now, these are not practices that are respectful, right? And these are not practices that would then be praised by the Buddha. If you're using a Dhamma like a knife, it is said. The Buddha says, when you use a Dhamma like a knife to slit a person's throat, right? That is where then you utterly, completely disrespect the Dhamma. That is not something that we do, right? And then we move on. Brahma-like body, meaning the chest and all of that, perfectly straight, right? Giving up killing living beings, right? Giving up killing living beings. Remember that in the past, right, even certain members of maybe our families as well, hunting was something of a part and parcel. I still have a collection of guns at home that my father and grandparents used to use. Hunting was very much a sort of one of those elitist sort of sports, wasn't it? Right? Now, in these countries, maybe they don't hunt as often, but it is a very father-son kind of thing to take their children out fishing, right? It is very American, I suppose. It is very American to take their children out fishing and teach them, their kids, how to fish, right? Now, things like that even, right? This is that. This is what entails that. Giving all of that up, right? Then we had seven convex surfaces on the hands, feet, shoulders, and trunk. This is like the round, good sort of formed, right? Good form sort of places, the convexes on the body. And that is what? What is that for? That is because of gave delicious and good foods to people, right? Now, sometimes,
That's a common thing.
sorry?
No, I was just joking here.
Yeah, it's muted now. But here, here it is important to note, when we are able to give, we try to give the best that we possibly could, right? The best that we possibly could. Sometimes we feel, okay, for example, sometimes, oh, it's a homeless person, you know, we don't need to. No, that is not what we do. That is not what we do. If we can give something, we give it in the best of our ability to a person, regardless. The fact that, you know, the fact that, oh, they can do their own work and all of these things, you know, true enough, right? True enough. But if we are getting something out of the world, shouldn't we be giving back something to the world? That is also true enough, though, right? So please, we are not, we try to be considerate, we are considerate, and we try to give back. And a way that we could give back to all the things that we have taken from the world is at least to help another fellow human being. That's the most basic of things that we could possibly do, right? So in that way, giving the best that we possibly could give, right? And of course, we know now, for example, when venerables like Samantha Bhadra, you know, through certain of the donations that he has hold, you know, we know, you know, they are a little bit, what's the word to use? It is out of the ordinary, I suppose. But, you know, when we do look at the Dhamma, if you are able to, that is exactly what you should be doing. If you are able to. Yes, flamboyant. Yes, over the top. Yes, all of those things. But yes, remember it was or how the monasteries of the Buddha were built. Remember I told you about the lamps which are lit out of sandalwood. That's the thing. If you can do, you do to that extent, right? Sometimes it hurts people to say, okay, this should be done, this should be done. Actually, if you can do it, go ahead and do it. If you can make golden parasols and give out to people, that is what we try to do. We try to give the best to people, right? The best of the quality. Moving on. Then we have the golden complexion, delicate. Okay. The front of his body is like a lion's, and then no furrow between his shoulders, both because desirous of everyone's benefit. A person wants people to benefit. A person wants people to be well. Right now, this is something which must be reminded to all the immigrants who have come from their countries to these countries. We tend to always put people down, right? Especially when we are living in foreign countries, right? We know, all of us know how it happens here, right? We are all, most of us are immigrants here, right? There is a culture, and this is not a very Sri Lankan thing. This is actually very sort of common between all people who migrate from their countries, right? No, this is not a Buddhist way. The Buddhist way is we are happy that another person is doing well for themselves. We are glad at another person's success, right? That is the attitude we must have in our hearts towards people. That is the attitude that we must maintain. Our practice is far more superior and greater to harbor petty emotions such as jealousy. No, we know that the world is a greater place than that. right? And then moving on. Body proportions like a banyan tree, his arm span equals his height, concerned over the masses' welfare again. Then we have evenly rounded shoulder curves, desirous of everyone's benefit. A perfect sense of taste, habitually harmed no life. Meaning, he doesn't even think of harming life, right? Doesn't even think. That thought, that way of behavior does not cross that person's mind, right? Does not cross that person's mind. Now, for example, if we are to take, now if something is in the bin, if, we had thrown something in the bin, I don't know about you, but I would never pick it up from the bin and eat it, right? I suppose all of you may be the same, right? It doesn't even cross. It's in the bin. It is like it has gone into hell. We will not pick it up, right? It doesn't cross our mind. It's done. It's gone, right? Similarly, that similar pattern, when it comes to wrong, when it comes to harming beings and doing things against other people, it doesn't cross this person's mind, right? That is the amount of purity in that person's mind, right? And then a perfect sense of taste, and then his jaw is like that of a lion's, given up idle chatter, right? Given up idle chatter. 40 teeth, given up divisive speech. Even teeth, given up wrong livelihoods. No spaces between his teeth, given up divisive speech again, breaking people up through their speech. Large and brilliantly white teeth, given up wrong livelihood. Very long and large tongue, given up abusive speech. And perfect voice, sweet like the sound of an Indian cuckoo, given up abusive speech again, right? Now, all of these things, remember, all of these things, even in the modern world, with all of these sort of coaches and brilliant coaches out there, all of this is something that all of them say, do not engage yourself in chatter that wastes your time, idle chatter, right? Do something, speak something, learn something, invest your time in something that makes you feel greater than the being that you got up as, right? This is not Buddhist. This is the way humans should be, right? This is the way the world, that intelligent world, should be, right? Why are we bothered about the weaknesses and befallings of other people? Shouldn't we be perfecting and bettering ourselves, right? That is what this is all about, right? There is no one who could say, no, these things are necessary. Even, for example, abusive speech. Bosses who treat their employees and speak to their employees badly are not seen as good bosses anymore. There was a time, yes, but now, no, it's not. It's seen as very poor management. It's seen as abuse, which can even be taken to courts at this time, isn't it? Right? You are these things the Buddha taught us 2,500 years ago, right? It's absolute common sense, right? But to the weak-minded, they don't see the worth of it, right? We have to be engaged in bettering ourselves, and this is that. And then we have, right, deep bluish black eyes, never stared at others negatively, and eyelashes like a cow's, meaning long, thick eyelashes. It's always beautiful when people have long eyelashes, isn't it? Right? Now, that is because you never stare at a person with anger and anger in your eyes. You don't stare down a person. You look at people in a compassionate way, in an understanding way. Of course, look here, to practice these things, you need a bit of meditation, of course, right? To be aware, because sometimes these things come to us almost habitually. Yes, I understand. That is why, but we don't give up. We are not losers in that way. We don't give up, right? We meditate, yes, we fail, we do it again, right? We do it again. We fail, but we try again. That is what it's all about, right? And then we have white urna, soft like cotton down, right? Given up for speech. And then we have a head shaped like a royal turban, right? A head shaped like a royal turban. A head shaped like a royal turban, and that is because of the holiest leader of the masses, right? The leader of the okay. Now, do we have time? Okay. Please turn to page number 161, please. Yes. Now in page number 160, right? 160, on the left side, you have the 32 marks, and on the right side, you had the minor marks, right? You have the minor marks, which speaks of the other marks which were present within the Buddha, within the Buddha's appearance, right? Within the Buddha's appearance. Now, then we are moving on to page number 167. Damsiri. Okay. I'm going to read this because we don't have much time. All right. Psychological reason. On a deeper level, there is a psychological reason for the later trend in hypothesizing and defying of the Buddha, and the creating and worshipping of a new Buddhist deities and holy beings. While the Buddhist community was small, centered around the living Buddha, its members were constantly reminded and motivated to practice the Dhamma. That is, to keep to the moral training, to mentally cultivate and to work for the realizing insight wisdom, vipassana. Right? There was gradual, continuous motivation. Everyone was reminded to practice Buddhism. Everyone was reminded. Now, if we see, it has the training, if we do look at this sort of the way that it is managed, it has become a little bit more narcissistic in a way, because even the opportunities of going out for Pindapath on alms round was an opportunity for the forest monks to go out and then remind people, look here, practice. Right? But when we look at the cultural implications that have taken over Buddhism and its practice over the years following, we find that there is a great amount of, because of the culture, there is a great amount of narcissistic tendencies which have arisen within these practices, which we know. For example, a dana would now be given to pass merits, right? That is not a proper practice. It is a very narcissistic practice. You are giving something to get something. When was that the definition of a dana? Right? That is not proper dana. Right? And we had to, of course, entertain that also. Right? Knowing very well, this is not the way that you would give for a person. The relying of merit. We believe culturally that the relying of this merit has to be done by a monk. No. It has to be done by you. It's your relative, right? It's your relative. Of course, reminding the monks, reminding the relatives is a different story. Now at PAOK, I remember this beautiful thing that we had to do is, when our devotees or the devotees of PAOK from all around the world had some sort of, a relative who was going through a terminal illness or something of the sort, we had these boards all around the monastery, in the meditation halls and the dining halls, where these boards, we had posters put up of people who were asking for metta, meaning they wanted us to radiate metta towards them to help their illnesses, right? Which is a very strong practice, really. And which is a beautiful practice, so before we take dana, because we would sometimes go early because we have to get dressed, and when you get dressed also, we must all get dressed in the same way to all the rest of the monks. So if our robes are lower than a certain amount, we are pulled out of the line and put back. We had to get dressed properly and come back. So if we are put out of the line, then we had to stay for another 30 or 40 minutes to sort of get our food, right? So we get there early. So what we tend to do is we dress ourselves up and we go to this board and we meditate in front of the board and transfer merits and metta to these people, who will be people with different terminal illness and all of these things. Remember, now there is nothing called you have to do here, right? There's nothing called you have to do. Guna is something where you want to do it for a betterment of the person, right? And when you, as people who are learning the Dhamma, please remember, you don't do this where you just give the dana because you want to share merits. That is a very, very narcissistic thing to do, right? And that couldn't be any more further from the Dhamma that it is. Give dana for a purpose of the main reason is to support or to show respect and gratitude towards the Dhamma. That should be the main thing, right? And out of that merit that you develop, that is what you share. Right? That is what you share. Remember that in your mind. It is very, very important, all of these things to keep in mind, because this is where our practice is really tested, right? Our practice is truly tested when we have to sort of think about these things, right? Moving on. As the Buddhist community grew larger, not everyone was determined to keep to proper Dhamma practice. And those with little or no learning and experience became Dhamma spokesmen, right? Those with little or no learning and experience became Dhamma spokesmen. With passing of the Buddha, the tendency to objectify the Dhamma, to take it merely as something to know and to be measured by, predominant. Right? That is clear, right? The Dhamma has turned into Buddhism and generally viewed as an academic subject or taken up as a lucrative livelihood. That is something to master for the sake of worldly learning and follow status and gains. Meditation, in other words, is ritualized, like religious prayer, pushed aside and trivialized. Without a proper method of mental cultivation, it is difficult, if not impossible, to strengthen the mind, much less to speak of wholesome emotional independence. Beautiful. Understandably, in such a milieu, spiritual doubt would be strong. Don't we see it? Spiritual doubt. People practicing Buddhism for 30, 40, 50 years still do not know what Buddhism really truly is, right? Spiritual doubt would be strong. Even if academic learning and book knowledge of Buddhism is strong, especially in the face of personal and social difficulties, we might begin to have a better idea of problems, but yet feel less empowered to solve them. Fault finding further cloud up our willingness and ability to think and act in any wholesome way, right? To think and act in any wholesome way. Religious activities, daily lives, and personal habits tend to be ritualistic, even superstitious. Oh my gosh, this is like this was written for all the Asians. Piatan is really taking a swing, right? Even superstitious. That is, we tend to seek answers in others and externally. As such, we tend to feel challenged by our past and inadequacy, and by the personal perceived success of others and other religions. We tend to measure ourselves against others so that the Dhamma has no priority in our lives. This measuring of self against others by way of things, status, success, status, and power is called conceit. A big problem with conceit is that it tends to keep us stuck in our narrow mindset and lacking faith and confidence in ourselves and in the goodness and genius of fellow Buddhists. Rooted in doubt and conceit, we become spiritually weak, right? Spiritually weak, and so tend towards individualism. An individualist is one who tries to be different from others so that they find it difficult to work with others. Oh my gosh, hits home, right? If such if such a trend dominates us, then it would hinder our social maturity. We become emotionally stunted. We might work in the name of Buddhism, even claim to promote it, but the reality is that we are simply promoting ourselves, our views, creating our own Buddhisms. Buddhism has become a drug on which we depend. On that note, I'm going to end the class. Right? That is an absolutely true. I don't think it could be truer. Right? I don't think it can be truer. We coming from Sri Lanka, we have seen how Buddhism, when we, during poor days and all of these things, we do not see strong people, we see beggars, we see people who are weak. We rarely do we see strong, powerful Buddhist practitioners. We see people out with a palm all the time. Now, I'm not speaking about money or anything like that. I'm speaking about 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years still. Oh, I don't know what Buddhism is. What have you been doing for decades on decades? Why is it that over so much time, we tend to still think that we do not know Buddhism? Or why is it that we still have this doubt in mind? Is it that we have not studied it properly? Is it that we have not really understood how to practically practice it? Or is it just because we don't know the definitions of the term and terminology that is used? Right? This is all to say, this Buddhism, as mentioned, right, as mentioned in what we read, should not be something which is like a religion that we practice, a religion that we then compare to the Muslims and the Christians and the Hindus and the Jains and all of these people. It is a pattern of life, a pattern as much as part of your life as you sit down at a table and you eat. It should be something in your life as the air that you breathe, as the clothes that you wear to cover up yourself. It is not to be taken, because remember, in the doctrine of shunyata and with Buddhism, it is almost so difficult to teach about shunyata to Buddhists, being a Buddhist sort of a doctrine that comes from the Buddha, because it is so difficult to get people to let go of Buddhism. How are we? Shunyata is a point that enables a person to attain nirvana, to attain enlightenment. Shunyata is emptiness, for those of you who do not know. But this emptiness, we might let go of everything, but at the end, still we find some sort of attachment to a specific religion that we sort of say, that we identify. All of these things must sort of shed and break away, right? Break away. A concept is petty and weak. All concepts are impermanent, due and causes suffering, and are formed or has a formation of non-self within it. Clinging onto any concept makes us weak. Makes us weak, right? We see it in countries like Indonesia, where when their departed relatives pass, the people have to get into huge amounts. Of course, the wealthy can afford it, but the poor people, they get into huge amounts of debt because they believe if they don't throw that grand funeral for the departed, that the departed will be stuck in a sort of a parallel universe or in an abode that they do not go into heaven. So they go into debt and end up paying that debt for 10, 20, 30 years. There was a whole documentary done on it actually by BBC, right? This is how concepts weaken our mind, enslaves us and makes us weaker day by day, right? And somehow the way that Buddhism has been portrayed now is in a way that we sort of believe that we have to keep on being a certain way or be doing things of a certain way rather than actually embodying compassion into us. We have the signs of compassion, which we believe without these signs, we are not Buddhist. But at the end of the day, it's not about the signs. It's not about the signs. These are things that we all have to remember. We have to try to be better, not Buddhist, to be better at, or rather to work towards enlightenment. Even if we do not attain enlightenment, we will be much happier people, right? We will be much happier people. The thing that I love about the Dhamma, even in this sutta that we have gone through, is it doesn't say be specific to the Buddhist or the people who are the Buddha's followers. It doesn't say, this is for just, for your brothers. I was a Catholic, so I could say, in Catholicism, we learned something else. You're supposed to, your house, the house of Lord was your frat house, is your frat house, right? When God divided the Dead Sea into two, it was to save a specific group of people, and he drowned the rest, according to the story, of course, which I also don't believe really happened. Regardless, in Buddhism, the thing that I love, being an outsider to it, meaning being a Catholic boy raised by a born-again mother and a Catholic father, is the fact that I love about this is that everyone is equal, regardless of whether you are a Brahmin, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian. Be compassionate to everyone. The reason why it is equal to everyone is because this doctrine is not a religion, a segmented religion. It is a way of life. That is why. Because if it is a group, then that group is going to always protect itself, think about itself, right? Where we have a sense of the group is where the Sangha is involved, where we support each other's practice. But if it comes to a position where now the practice is compromised, we take each other by the ear and throw them out of the door. That is, at the end, if it is beyond recuperation, beyond healing, for example, like the Parajakas, right? This is something that we must really know for ourselves. Compassion for all is equal. Let us not be controlled by the weak thought of men who try to control us through the religions and practices, through the world that we live in. All right, so I'm going to leave you on that. It's 8:39. So does anyone have a question, if any? All right, so next week we are going to do the Mula Pariyaya Sutta, right? The Mula Pariyaya Sutta. So we are excited for it, right? So Mula Pariyaya Sutta next week. I hope Squarespace will be okay. I'm sure Squarespace will be okay by then. So I'll put up the Sutta, and I will see you all for the next week's Sutta class. All the best. Take care and be ready for the Mula Pariyaya, please, because it is a sutta which is deemed as the most difficult sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. and one of the most difficult suttas in the whole Tipitaka, actually, because I mean, it can be taught easily, it can be difficult as well. But to grasp the full extent of the sutta, let us be ready for it. Okay, and take care and all the very best. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.